To order. Good afternoon, everyone. And first off, j'aimerais souligner que les tests ont été faits pour.
I'd like to point out that the sound tests have been made for the witnesses today.
For joining us. Apologies to our witnesses for the delayed start to this committee meeting. We had 3 votes in the House, and that's the reason for this delay. And also, I want to extend, on behalf of the committee, my most sincere gratitude to all of you for making yourselves available on such a short notice to start with us this study. So welcome to meeting number 41 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 26, 2022. The committee is meeting to study the current state of blockchain technology in Canada and its potential for innovation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23, 2022. Et nous avons la chance d'avoir...
And we have before us today Laura Foin, who is co-chair Digital Assets and Blockchain, Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt LLP. Matthew Burgoyne, co-chair Digital Assets and Blockchain, Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt LLP. I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. 3IQ Corp, we have Mr. Pascal Saint-Jean, who is president. And finally, from Women in Blockchain Canada, we have Justina Osowska, founder. Thank you all for coming here. You have the opportunity to speak in the language of choice. We have simultaneous interpretation. First of all, I'll turn the floor over to Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt. You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Standing Committee for undertaking a study of the current state and potential applications of blockchain technology in Canada, and for inviting us to comment on this issue. As Mr. Chair said, I'm a partner at the law firm of Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt, who created a dedicated team to deal with blockchain.
If needed. L'existence de cette équipe qui ne correspond pas à
The existence of this team, which covers not an area of law, but rather a type of asset technology, leads me to make an initial observation as to the scope of what needs to be covered when blockchain is studied. We have a team of 50 lawyers covering multiple areas of law, Matthew and I, with our own field. And similarly, blockchain is as much about commerce, currency, coinage, and paper money as it is about banking and criminal law. In this context, in order to give you some food for thought, I propose to go back over the technology, the type of goods, and the stakeholders involved. First of all, technology. Blockchain is a technology behind virtual currencies, or rather, it's the creation of virtual currencies, Bitcoin, first of all, which require the development of blockchain technology. Over time, other applications have emerged, including the creation of other types of digital assets. The assets involved, well, they can be divided into 3 broad categories. Cryptocurrencies, which generally use their own blockchain. Tokens, asset reference tokens, or security tokens. For example, they could be non-fungible tokens called NFTs, digital assets representing real objects such as art, music, and videos. There are also tokens that refer to a currency or currencies, commodities, digital assets. Finally, there are tokens representing rights. For example, the rights of investors in a joint venture, which are then securities. The third category is utility tokens. They have a specific use. For example, they can be used in the future on a platform in exchange for a special service or to receive preferential treatment for services. Finally, the stakeholders. We have various technology, but the stakeholders in this context are the issuers, holders, and intermediaries of digital assets, such as the European Union has called them. In Canada, FINTRAC and the securities regulators have been the first to publish their views on the application of law and regulations under their jurisdiction, thereby establishing their jurisdiction over certain digital assets. In so doing, the securities regulators have used their ability to interpret securities laws and introduced a new concept of a crypto asset contract based on the idea of immediate non-transfer of ownership, which, in their view, makes the agreement an investment contract and therefore a security. In doing so, certain issues, intermediaries, and/or holders of certain digital assets are now subject to securities distribution regulation. My colleague Matthew will elaborate on the issues arising from this current state of affairs, but my observations are that market participants in Canada would benefit from greater legal clarity consultation. We have the benefit of observing what is being done in other jurisdictions. In the European Union, the choice was made to distinguish the applicable regulation by type of crypto asset. They wanted to pay particular attention to euro-backed stablecoins. They decided to exclude FTs and to create a crypto asset service provider regime, thus bringing some legal clarity, but also its share of issues that are worth considering. In the U.S., a multitude of projects and initiatives are now on the table in a climate of competition as to the relevant jurisdiction, and there is a great deal of uncertainty for market players, sometimes to the benefit of creating these mega competitors for our Canadian players. To conclude, I would also like to suggest that attention should be paid to the governance structure of the blockchain in question, which is too rarely mentioned, and it would be relevant to pay attention to that. Finally, thank you for this opportunity for dialogue, and I hope that the above has been useful to you, and I'd be available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much, Ms. Fwan, and it's a pleasure to see you again 10 years after sitting for the bar. So thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now turn the floor over to Mr. Bourgoin. You have 5 minutes. On a point of order, please. I just want to ensure, I see that there are certain members of our panel who don't have headsets on. If they want to ask questions, please ensure that they have, yes, that's an important reminder. And of course, all parliamentarians as well as the witnesses. Well, I can see with the witnesses, they're all wearing their headsets or proper headsets. So, Mr. Bourgoin, the floor is now yours.
Matthew Bourgoin, partner and co-chair of the Digital Asset and Blockchain Group at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt. I'm in our Calgary office, and it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much, committee members, for asking me to come in and be a witness today. While blockchain has a wide application in many different industries, supply chain management, healthcare, oil and gas, manufacturing, real estate, and other industries, cryptocurrency is also crucially important. To date, I believe Bitcoin is the best example we have of a fully developed, decentralized, and well-functioning blockchain network. Blockchain is important, but cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether are also important and are increasingly playing a more significant role in business transactions, investments, and other digital financial transactions. The following are some of the rationales behind why companies are testing and adopting cryptocurrencies in Canada. First, crypto could enable access to a tech-savvy customer base who values transparency in their transactions. Payments and cross-border transactions, for example, acquisitions of goods and services, paying foreign contractors and foreign employees could be made using crypto in a matter of seconds versus waiting sometimes up to a week to settle cross-border transactions with bank wires. Crypto could enable access to new capital and liquidity pools via the tokenization of traditional investments. Many of my clients, who are comprised of entrepreneurs, medium-sized, and some larger businesses in the crypto and blockchain space, face enormous challenges. These challenges include lack of access to basic banking services, lack of access to insurance products, a difficult labor market, and high regulatory compliance costs, mainly securities law compliance. Access to banking is especially burdensome for Canadian entrepreneurs in this space. Canadian entrepreneurs who otherwise comply with regulation and raise significant investment from Canadian investors are being denied basic business banking and checking accounts quite regularly. The reason being given by Canada's banks is that crypto is too risky and the compliance costs related to anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing regulation do not make it economically feasible to provide banking services to crypto companies, save only for the largest companies. This puts small business owners at a disadvantage and puts Canadian businesses in general at a disadvantage when compared to international, mainly US-based crypto companies who have easier access to banking. Insurance is another difficult product to obtain. My clients are forced to obtain policies from offshore or foreign insurance providers, sometimes at astronomical premiums and rates. There is a perception that crypto is still high risk, when the reality is that most crypto companies in Canada are registered with multiple regulators and are arguably more regulated than businesses in other industries. Securities law-related compliance costs, including costs associated with complying with recent Canadian Securities Administrator staff notices, can run companies millions of dollars in legal fees per year. Also, compliance with Canadian securities legislation substantially limits the product offerings which Canadian crypto asset trading platforms can provide to Canadians, which puts the Canadian platforms at a competitive disadvantage when compared to foreign-based crypto asset trading platforms. The Canadian Securities Administrators and IIROC have tried their best to protect the public, and they are operating under trying circumstances. However, there's been a lack of consultation by the regulators with industry when it comes to cryptocurrency law and policy, especially when it comes to securities legislation. By some estimates, the global cryptocurrency market is worth almost $900 billion. In 2019, the Canadian Securities Administrators and IIROC published a joint CSA-IIROC consultation paper, 21402, Proposed Framework for Crypto Asset Trading Platforms. There has been a lot that has changed in the industry since 2019, including new technological developments and a lot of new industry participants. For an industry of this size, we should expect to see more than one consultation paper, which only had roughly 50 responses. When compared with other novel securities-like products, such as derivatives and contracts for difference, products that have a substantially lower market and popularity, there have been virtually no consultation with the Canadian crypto industry. One concern I've heard from clients is that the law is effectively being made via private orders and terms and conditions imposed on private companies, which terms and conditions are unique to a particular crypto company and do not apply to every single company in every circumstance. This is not an appropriate way to legislate a fast-growing industry in Canada. There needs to be more consultation with the public on how proposed policies might affect Canadian businesses in the space in a burgeoning global industry, more transparency into how regulators are developing policy and what policy concerns are being addressed. There are instances where existing law maybe isn't best suited to regulate certain crypto products, for example, fiat-anchored stablecoins. And finally, Canada is at risk of lagging behind other developed countries when it comes to digital finance. For example, for the second time in a row, Payments Canada has delayed the launch of the real-time rail payment system, as it was first announced to be delivered in 2022, and then rescheduled the launch to mid-2023. No revised timeline has been given by Payments Canada as part of its most recent delay announcement. And similarly, the open banking system has been delayed until 2023, putting Canada and Canadians at a disadvantage. Thank you for your time. And that concludes my written submission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burgoyne. We'll move to Pascal Saint-Jean. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
And I'll be happy to answer questions in English or French. My name is Pascal Saint-Jean. I'm the president of 3iQ Corp. We are a digital asset manager, and we were the first to bring a fully regulated crypto product, spot Bitcoin and Ethereum product globally, again, through the regulated process. We believe that this industry should be regulated in the right way to protect investors, and our mission is to make crypto safe and secure and easy for investors across Canada. A lot of my colleagues at Osler have, not colleagues, but friends, had talked about a lot of the challenges in the industry, which I will repeat in a little bit, but I'd like to turn this a little bit more in terms of stories of actual Canadian citizens, particularly friends and family, and how this industry is impacting them. Because I think in the end, what we're trying to do here is not only help industry, but to help Canada across the nation and our citizens, as well as our businesses. I'll share a story of my parents who grew up in Northern Ontario and basically started a very small business in early 1980s. And during that time as small business owners, they were out of reach of real estate, out of reach of accredited investor solutions, which today are mostly very sophisticated investment products available for individuals who meet certain standards, had no access to necessarily to capital or to debt to scale their business, and at the same time were poorly advised personally on their investments. Fast forward 40 plus years, they were held in a spot of really not looking like if retirement was possible. Well, thanks to these new industries and our products, which were launched actually before I joined the company, my parents were able to invest in this new emerging asset class, which gave them the ability to actually take their retirement last year, which was quite an amazing piece of news from that perspective. What I'm sharing this all together, though, is that Canadians need access and need clarity. Fast forward to today, I'm seeing more and more of similar stories for our younger generations, people in their 20s and their 30s, asking us all the time, how do I gain access to assets? How do I move forward in life in terms of being able to grow financially? We know for a fact that wage earners are behind in Canada, not keeping up to inflation, not keeping up to the cost of living. On the flip side, asset owners, people who own businesses, people who own real estate and other types of asset classes are getting richer. So the reality is we need to create technology in a way to simplify asset ownership and to fractionalize asset ownership. That's the power that blockchain could bring to multiple industries, not just cryptocurrencies, which I'll be happy to talk about moving forward. So from our perspective, we're seeing the solution less about distribution of wealth, but more about empowerment of wealth. And that comes through blockchain technology. We believe that blockchain is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And the question becomes which countries want to participate and utilize this new industry and this emerging asset class to help grow our economy. We believe that Canada has seen a head start in certain areas. There are banking challenges. There are insurance challenges. From our industry, from the finance side, we were able to get a head start globally. We are seeing that becoming more and more difficult as regulation is not being clear. And like our colleagues, my friends at Ulster were saying that our compliance cost, our legal cost are very high because we are educating the regulators. We are educating everyone we work with. But again, we're doing so because we want to be fully regulated and bring safe, secure products to the market. From our perspective, our analysis of the benefits for Canada is job creation and talent retention. Last year, we saw billions of dollars globally from a venture capital perspective enter the space, the fastest growing investment space globally, and a lot of talent. Our engineers, our mathematicians, our scientists, as well as marketers and any other types of roles are going into the blockchain space. So we either keep the talent here or they will go somewhere else. There will be a brain drain if we do not act. Global investment is knocking at the door. They're holding off, though. They're waiting for clarity. But Canada being a G7 nation, if regulation becomes clear and a clear roadmap becomes present, we will see billions of dollars entering the ecosystem, both at the underlying asset investment, but also in new capital for industry. I also believe we need diversification of our economy. Being able to take that charge and take the lead globally on blockchain will allow us to do just that. From that, the digital economy itself, if we have clarity on regulation and allowing the economy or the industry to boom in Canada, will give wage earners the ability to participate in the digital economy, whether as asset owners or as participants in this new space. And through fractionalization of ownership, whether it is cryptocurrency, fractional ownership of real estate, of fine art, or of other assets, enabling Canadians across the country to have a small piece of assets to help them grow their net worth as they try to build a life for themselves across Canada. These are the opportunities that we see, including access to debt and to capital and to financing through peer-to-peer networks and through decentralized finance. So a lot of opportunities across the board for businesses, for citizens, and for commerce coming here. So with that being said, I look forward to talking about some of these stories and the technology behind us. And I have tons of examples of companies we've invested in, such as NeoFlow and Stablecorp, that are bringing cross-border payments for businesses, that are enabling blockchain for the oil and gas industry, and saving hundreds of millions of dollars in that process. I look forward to your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Saint-Jean. Et finalement,
Thank you, Mr. Saint-Jean. And now, Mrs. Osasqua.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee members for having me here today, representing Women in Blockchain Canada. The corporation has been federally incorporated since 2018, and what we've been doing is workshops around blockchain education, because really, in order for us to move anywhere, people need to know what blockchain is, how it works, what the use cases are, and specifically, the mission of the organization is to inspire women to become involved in blockchain technology. There's various studies that confirm that women are underrepresented in blockchain technology. So, and various studies confirm that. Furthermore, to add to what other people have said, there's 15% of Canadians who are underbanked. So definitely the financial sector is somewhere that, we really need, I think that there could be regulation that could really help people have access, especially to those who are underrepresented. Basically, where I started with blockchain technology is coming from an immigrant background, having a conversation with another person who's an immigrant and sending money abroad. Using the current financial system, it is difficult, it is more expensive, and the reality is it takes a long time for things to be authenticated. So a lot of other people have also mentioned what NFTs, insurance, the banking sector. So what I can do is just add to that. Canada, one of the biggest industries is real estate. So, for example, you can use blockchain for title searches, making it much cheaper, less expensive, and authenticate on the blockchain. Another, use case can be, for example, authentication of documents. So just adding to what everybody else has already said. But what I would really like to focus on is the fact that in order to create regulation, there is education that is needed around this space. So people need to know what is really happening, and that's really the mission behind the organization. And in closing, I would like to suggest to the committee members to really look at how we can include those at different economic levels in this space. Specifically, I offer a recommendation for consultation strategies to be developed to reach the underrepresented groups. Thank you.
merci beaucoup. Merci à tous nos témoins. Donc,
Thank you to all of our witnesses. Without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Lobb for 6 minutes.
Congratulations on this important study here for the committee. First question is for the group at Osler. I've heard many times through the last couple of years that we need to look at the regulatory burden around innovation, around blockchain. And my question to you is, have you identified 2 or 3, let's call it low-hanging fruit, that either the government could help with to deal with regulation or deal with clarity to allow this sector to continue to grow and create jobs in Canada? Either Laurie or Matthew, take it away.
Okay, I'll let Matthew maybe develop and further expand on this. I think one of the issues you will encounter as the federal government is the fact that until now it's been regulated under securities laws and regulations, which I think Matthew explained quite properly during his presentation and mine. So to me, one thing that we should look at is what are the products that are currently under this purview that maybe eventually should not be, because we're talking about currencies or your jurisdiction and of money. And Matthew, I know you have a lot to say about that, so I'll leave it to you.
Oh, yeah, no, thanks, Laura. So there are fiat or Canadian dollar anchored stablecoins, just to use an example. It's a digital token that's anchored 1-for-1 with the Canadian dollar. And in various discussions we've had with provincial securities regulators, they've expressed a concern and taken the position that these Canadian dollar anchored stablecoins, to use an example, are securities and should be regulated as securities. When the practical use and a lot of the intent and use with these tokens is to use them like currency. like the Canadian dollar. So, the question becomes: is it appropriate to regulate these tokens under the regime of securities legislation and policy when no one's really buying these Canadian dollar anchored stablecoins with the expectation that they're going to increase in value? It's not like a traditional investment, and the slotting them in securities law is being a little awkward for at least one of my clients, and it's caused a lot of legal fees and discussion back and forth with exactly how the stable token is going to be sold, and it just, the effect is it's going to be very hard for clients to actually do business and to offer these types of products because the securities law just doesn't quite fit. So it's probably more appropriate that they be regulated as like a currency and perhaps be regulated under a different regulator like the Bank of Canada or another regulator, because they're more akin to a currency than a security. That's one example. Is the fiat-backed stablecoin.
Mr. St. John, in your research that you've done at 3iQ and just in your own personal research, what are some of the most promising areas that blockchain, like we've talked about digital assets and we've talked about transfers of money, et cetera, but what are some other areas that you see as some of the most promising areas that blockchain technology will deliver for Canadians and innovation?
So it's a very broad question to be answered, but I want to separate. I always teach us like blockchain and decentralization and cryptocurrency are three different things that together make use of a lot of what we're seeing today. Blockchain technology is the database ecosystem. So for example, there's a company that we've invested in called NeoFlow. They do blockchain technology for oil and gas. There is no currency associated to it. It is not decentralized. It is not meant to be a global network. It's meant to be a very niche network. But that blockchain technology itself and the way that they studied supply chain and how they work with oil and gas has saved hundreds of millions of dollars in efficiencies and thousands of hours. Right? So that's the blockchain technology. There's a lot of applications in supply chain and forestry, oil and gas, in traditional space, right? Then there's the financialization or the peer-to-peer aspect. For example, I've seen this, it's a very early stage idea, but I thought very innovative, of enabling peer-to-peer financing for down payments for mortgages for new families, right? So a lot of people can potentially get financing from the bank but need the down payment. They don't know where to get it. Mom and dad don't have it. Family don't have it. So how do we pull together in a way that is regulated, that is fully tracked on the blockchain, that is governed by smart contracts? That is one of the ways that we are also seeing some interesting ideas that can empower citizens. So there's a financing side. There's the blockchain technology sort of application, two different things. And then there's the distributed aspect, which is the ability of saying no one central organization or entity owns the rights to it. And that where it brings a lot of global innovation. So I could go on, but I wanted to give two clear examples. Blockchain, crypto, and decentralization are not the same. And I think we all need to understand that at a fundamental technological level so that we can regulate things differently.
Okay, and probably one last question, or am I out of time?
Very brief question and brief answer.
Justina, we were at a similar conference in Toronto this summer, and I watched the segment you spoke at. But what struck me was the amount of young people. I think I was one of the oldest guys there. I hate to say it. Just talk about the youth and the intelligence that's entering this sector and how important it is going to be for the future of Canada.
Yeah, I absolutely think that it's going to be a transformative technology across various sectors. So I think it's imperative for Canada to be a first mover. I think that Canada has, actually, I would like to acknowledge Canada's work that has already happened. We were the country that issued the first Bitcoin ETF, followed by an Ethereum ETF. Canada has regulated exchanges. So I think it's just amazing the work has already been done, but we have to continue that because this is a very fast-paced industry. And I think it, again, like what we were talking about, it's across so many sectors, and it really comes down to innovation. Blockchain is a ledger, but what it's doing is allowing for better transparency, authentication, and all these things. And like you said, all those young people, they did a survey in the US. 43% of youth would like to invest their retirement funds in this. So people are looking for the future. The young are looking into the future, into this technology and all the things that it can do. So yes, I think we, as a nation, my recommendation is that Canada does more research on what can be done and how we can move forward to have regulations that also allow business to work very well.
Thank you very much. We'll move to MP Lapointe.
Merci. Ms. Osowska, it sounds like your not-for-profit does a lot of really, really good work in supporting women in science and technology, engineering and mathematics. And I come from Sudbury, which is a global mining center, and we have done a lot to promote engineering and science careers for young women. So I'd be interested in knowing from you, what does diversity and inclusion look like in this area, and what kind of support are you seeing available to encourage diversity and inclusion?
Thank you for the question. So I think in the area currently there is support, whether it's private or public. I personally have worked with accelerators in both Ottawa and Montreal. I've worked with Invest Ottawa to host workshops. They provided me with the space, and also in Montreal with Bonjour Montréal. And I think currently there could be more that's done, especially when it comes to financial education and inclusion. I think there could be also more research done on that as well, because the thing is, women are underrepresented in that space, and we need to find out more of how to get them in. And so I know Ontario did a study on women in STEM, and I think things could be looked at in that study, for example, and like taken into blockchain and used to bring more women in, especially, for example, in advertising. Women are more interested in social impact than they are, for example, on just making money. So it would, the government could look at, like I was saying, implementing different strategies for how we can make this space more inclusive and equitable.
So, and we know that we've seen a big increase in promoting STEM to women and girls and minorities and those who have traditionally not been represented in these fields. Can you tell us, what can the industry and the different levels of government do and keep doing to promote and support the blockchain industry, tech and STEM, more generally, to ensure that we have an industry that represents the diversity of our country?
So like I mentioned, the research, but also in addition to that, education. I think people need to, I think women and girls need to see this. She has to see it to be it. So we need role models. It's not good enough to just, say, oh, we need to have this done. People need to see women who are actually succeeding in the field, and that they're being shown that, this is potential careers for them. There's potential work for them. There's potential mentorship programs. I think that could be another thing that's used to encourage women to get into the space.
Thank you. Mr. St. Jean, in your opening comments, you talked about how there are global investors that are waiting and very interested in investing in blockchain technology in Canada, but they're waiting for greater clarity. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so basically clarity in terms of regulation. We're seeing that in the U.S. We're seeing that in other areas as well. Right now, a lot of dollars, if you look at the amount of venture capital dollars, usually when you want to see the next emerging trend, you look at venture capital dollars. So for me, my background in engineering, I've scaled multiple businesses over the past 20 years in disruptive innovation, starting with the web in the late 90s and then moving forward to open source technology in the mid 2000s. So I'm seeing the same playbook here over again. So we look at the amount of dollars went into blockchain technology, and crypto is the most ever. I think it was $60 billion just last year in one fiscal year. Most of those dollars are happening in jurisdictions that are not, that basically are allowing things to be a little loose, whether it's the islands or other areas like that. And basically, they actually do want to bring capital into areas that have more stable governments, that have more clarity, like a G7 country like Canada. Right now, we're not seeing anyone looking to take the lead from a G7. Canada does have the lead, in my opinion. It's starting to maybe slow down. So in my opinion, they are waiting for that to be able to invest not only in new businesses, but also in the underlying assets and then the talent locally. And I have lots of examples just coming back from Calgary for the blockchain summit, where there was a lot of foreign investors starting to explore how to invest in mining in Canada, how to invest in equity in companies that are developing blockchain technology, and how to invest in the underlying asset, which we can provide access to.
2 minutes more or less.
So what is the role of government then when it comes to blockchain technology, and what kind of, and if it is regulation, what kind of regulation would enable the growth of that of the blockchain technology?
And we could debate this. I will separate the words. Blockchain technology is the ledger technology. I don't think that needs to be regulated at all. It's just another form of database, right? So like I was telling you, the examples of using it for supply chain management or for anything like that, that's just another form of database, and we don't need to regulate databases. That's been already done for years. Where we do need regulation is when that applies to where like, for example, securities, finance, and things of that nature, where we are entering areas where we do want consumer protection to make sure that we do bring, whether it's tokenization of assets that are regulated, to make sure that there is actually an underlying asset. If we were to tokenize real estate, that the real estate is real, that the companies are not taking advantage of end users, that those are fully tradable. So things of that nature, I think, unlocks, again, we talked about inclusion earlier in diversity. There is no greater inclusion than to enable every citizen, no matter where they come from, no matter how much money they have, to participate in asset ownership. That, to me, is the clarity that brings a flood of capital and actually empowers Canadian citizens across. So regulation on the financial side, but blockchain technology as a database does not require regulation, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Monsieur Lemire pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. Mr. Saint-Jean, the blockchain has many applications. Apart from cryptocurrency, what field do you see blockchain being involved in, and what obstacles do you see with the new for the new sectors that are entering this section? For the first time, I can see that this is a technology that creates new industry, but it also increases current industry. For instance, I gave the example of NeoFlow that works with the supply chain in the oil and gas sector, but other examples as well. There's stablecoin. There's a StableCorp now that uses, but they use it for cross-border payments. And as for me, I have several applications. Being able to work with other contractors or businesses throughout the world is wire transfers and things are very, very complicated. We would think with all the digital infrastructure of banks it would be easy, but it's not. It costs a lot of money to transfer money or wire money. So blockchain makes it very easy to do this internationally. Any industry, whether it be the mining sector or the real estate sector, there's always a use case for help increasing business. There's disruption, yes, but there's greater effectiveness and efficiencies leading to greater diversification. But blockchain technology increases the efficiencies for any potential industry. The use cases are not always clear, but for cryptocurrency, that's where the government can really play a significant role to determine how it can be used, how we can use blockchain for peer-to-peer funding, venture capital funding, etc. That gives access to citizens to have more investment opportunities. So two different scenarios, use case to help industry, and the other is to give greater access to citizens to this new blockchain technology. We do see with cryptocurrency, there's been a loss of trust. We saw what would happen with the volatility of cryptocurrency. Do you think this applies only to cryptocurrency, or do you think this phenomenon can apply to other uses, such as government functions? Do you think that this danger could be? Could you please clarify this question? There is one point on the volatility, and then you talked about dangers from the medical sector. I understand the first part, but as far as volatility is concerned, the best example I can give you, Shopify. 80% of the real estate market as well. we could discuss the impact of various investments. But generally speaking, if a company, I started my first business 22 years ago, it's a way of looking at its real-time value. You could say, oh, it's so volatile. It's changing. He's got one client now he's lost another one. But the question is, when you use blockchain or you use cryptocurrency, you see the creation or the value in real time. That normally, when a company goes public, they have to be in business for 5 to 10 years beforehand. But you get Microsoft or Shopify and it wants to go public, there's stability already built in. As far the crypto, well, it's normal that it be somewhat volatile. But as I said earlier, the blockchain is really a database. So you don't have to. Blockchain is extremely secure. It's very, very secure. Just look at Bitcoin. Its value, well, it totaling billions of dollars right now. And if it could have been hacked, it would have been hacked by now. The ledger would have been hacked by now if that was possible. So the blockchain technology is very secure. I don't think there's any rules or regulations necessary to protect that. Thank you very much. Is there a danger that the blockchain could be used in organized crime, for instance? I could send you a very interesting article that says that if we could track it with cryptocurrency, you see every possible transaction. So the danger is not the blockchain; it's the applications by third parties. If there's an application that doesn't have the same technology, if it's not secure, yes, so you can get hacked there. But it's not because of the blockchain. It's the applications. We need to do education, as my colleague said. Education is extremely important. That's why we exist. We want transactions to be safe and simple. And every time there's been some type of a theft or a computer hack, the FBI or investigators have always been able to find the money. It's impossible to take out the money and not have it traced. So it's not very efficient for a criminal. Thank you very much, Mr. Sajan. Mr. Massey, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for suggesting the study. I'm going to follow up as well, too, and invite anybody to chime in. We've done some work on fraud prevention, and just wondering what work needs to be done there. It was a good segue, the last part, and I'd like to hear more about, what types of industries might be more prone to fraud or illicit activity versus that of, proper investment, and how can we kind of improve those elements, and whether or not we need also to seek some international agreements. That's where I'm thinking about for the future.
So great question. If I can respond, it varies, but I'd say roughly once every 2 weeks, I get a call from someone, from a Canadian who is being the victim of fraud, and they've discovered they've been defrauded. They're desperate to get their funds back, and there's really, at this point, little chance, or little that I can do, because it's too late. The crypto is being transferred to someone that's out of the country, who knows where. In limited cases, law enforcement is successful in retrieving the funds and bringing them back to the victim, but that doesn't happen in the majority of cases. Where I see a pattern, and I've had probably 30, 40 calls, in the last few years or more from victims. So I see patterns. It's always an investment company. So people are being duped by so-called asset managers or investment funds where they're giving their cryptocurrency to a fraudulent fund that's going to manage their crypto on their behalf. That's almost always the case. So I think greater education that was mentioned by one of the other witnesses, there needs to be almost an education program devoted just to cryptocurrency and investment fund fraud. If it's initiated by the federal government, great, but there needs to be something that specifically targets cryptocurrency and investment fund fraud, because a lot of people want to get into cryptocurrency. They've heard about it. They want to invest in Bitcoin. They don't understand the difference between a regulated Canadian exchange. We have like great regulated crypto exchanges, including many in Alberta and in Ontario. But people don't know the difference between the regulated exchanges and the fraudulent crypto investment funds. So I think, an education campaign or that would promote awareness across Canada of just investing in a fraudulent fund, and don't let anyone manage your cryptocurrency. It's a education on who the good operators are and the risks. I think would be great.
I'd like to get a couple more people in on this. Like Kevin Cosgrove was one of our witnesses for fraud. He's from my area. He's done a lot of anti-fraud stuff. He actually presented me with a Bitcoin that was made because they were being sold originally, people thinking there was a real Bitcoin. And so he actually bought some online because they shut down the plant in England. But they were still, like, you could collect them, whatever. But there was I have it. I don't have it in front of me here because I'm in Ottawa, not in Windsor, but I have it in Windsor. But can I maybe get others to, how bad is, I guess, or how much extra complicated is it to convince people in blockchain technology with fraud kind of being somewhat associated with it or making it vulnerable, as we've heard? How serious should this be part of our repertoire of public education to make sure that it doesn't get caught in the crossfire of fraud? Because fraud is it's one of those things that we're still struggling with. So does anybody else have any comments on that? I'd love to hear from that.
If I may, I just wanted to add,
No, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to add something about what Matthew said. He's mentioned fraudulent players, but I would also like to emphasize, because you mentioned the possibility to consider international agreements, the fact that they're mostly foreign players. So it's not always a pure fraudulent player, but it's just a foreign player. And he's got the funds of a Canadian and then goes bankrupt in the US or something like this. And there is no way of getting the fund back, only because it's foreign. So yes, I do believe there is an opportunity here for international coordination and potential agreements with Canada and other countries in order to make sure that Canadians can retrieve their funds in these circumstances.
I totally agree with all the statements that were made. I just want to make sure that the message is clear that it's not blockchain or cryptocurrencies that are fraudulent, but basically sometimes the means of entering into the space, whether it's a bad player that enable investors to come in and potentially purchase something that's not real, or to the gentleman's point earlier, where someone utilizes the crypto to make a payment into something that is not real. So it's not necessarily crypto or blockchain that we want to be very clear. That's not where the fraud is happening at the blockchain level. It's happening because it's an easy means of payment. It's a bearer asset. So once it's a bit like giving cash. Once you give cash to someone, it's a bearer instrument. If they disappear, you lose that cash. Whereas some digital payment systems through banks and through international parties sometimes can reverse transactions, although very rare sometimes, but we see fraud in all aspects. So I just want to be very clear that we get the definitions right, because words and definitions matter in how we will regulate things moving forward.
I do appreciate that, and I know my time's up, but that's where I'm concerned, is because people, as they're trying to understand what blockchains are and all the things, it's all confusing, and it's bad enough with fraud on our regular payment stuff. So I think that's why I wanted to highlight those points, is because I think you made that earlier, is it wasn't the blockchain itself and the products, it was the acting players in between using that. And I'm just concerned about the lack of education. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. We'll move to MP Williams for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to split my time also with my colleague, Mr. Genereux. I'll start with Mr. Saint-Jean. What is blockchain worth in Canada? So how many industries do we have? How many jobs at this point? Any idea?
If I gave you numbers, they would be created. Although I just came back from an amazing event conference in Calgary from a great organization called the Canadian Blockchain Consortium. They are the closest thing to our network here in Canada. I would gladly put you in touch with the head of that, which is Kalea Carrington. She's an amazing ambassador for the space across Canada, and they do this type of analysis and data. But I would say it's in the billions of dollars right now. I mean, just the presence of that way. They're just looking at our market cap, looking at other companies in different spaces. It's in the billions and in the hundreds of thousands of jobs, if not more already.
You did mention you think Canada is a leader or could be a leader. So, what makes Canada a leader? Why do you see that we have the most potential?
Yeah, so look, there's a lot of different areas, and again, depending on the province, but we see a lot of mining in Quebec, in Alberta, where there's innovation on utilization of energy for better productivity, where energy that would have been wasted. So we're seen as a leader from that perspective. I don't want to tout our name, but my friend here did say we were the first in Canada to launch an ETF. That was us. So we took on the challenge with the regulators and were able to launch the first fully regulated spot Bitcoin and Ethereum product globally. Still to this day, we're one of the only ones who do it. Others use futures or others don't use proper underlying. So Canada and our regulators were very pro trying to exploring what this could be. And it seemed all of a sudden it kind of stalled because there was uncertainty. We're seeing a lot of poaching of the regulatory space. We're seeing a lot of uncertainties in terms of what's next. So I feel like there's kind of this lull and this stall, which is allowing other countries to catch up. But I'm glad to hear that we are seeing these types of panels and others to make sure we stay in the lead.
Laura, you talked earlier about recommendations for governance structure. Can you expand on that, on the governance structure you'd like to see?
Oh, sorry. No. To make it clear, I was talking about the different governance structure that a blockchain may have. So it may be entirely decentralized. It may be centralized. And I think if and when you're looking at either regulating or doing anything about a certain blockchain, we need to look at what type it is. Is it entirely decentralized or is it centralized? Because when it is, it's simply a ledger, right? So if a bank decides to keep a ledger on a blockchain to issue bonds, it's simply a ledger and that's all that is. If it's entirely decentralized and you have, for example, the necessity of 51% of the network to vote on any block for it being validated, that's a completely different governance structure. So I wouldn't advise the government to direct any type of governance structure, of course, because the blockchain by definition can have either of these. But to be mindful of the structure that a blockchain is following before thinking about regulating it or anything like this. That's all I wanted to, and if I may, I will take this opportunity to mention the central bank digital currency that we are seeing in certain countries, like Australia has a pilot, and that is a blockchain that would be established by the Bank of Canada to issue on the blockchain Canadian dollars. So that, for example, you would have to think about the governance structure that you do want on that blockchain.
Je peux continuer, monsieur? Il me reste combien de temps?
How much time do I have? Mr. Saint-Jean, we did a study not too long ago about computers. I wonder if there's any association, and please excuse my ignorance, but is there any type of tie between what we call the energy required for quantum computing and the blockchain? We know that the blockchain requires a great deal of energy here in Canada and elsewhere in the world. That's one question. And is there any association between the two? Because you did say that the blockchain had enabled a business that in the oil and gas sector to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a lot of money. I wonder how that happened. But is there any linkage with quantum computing, the calculations or the rapidity of the calculations with the blockchain? That's an excellent question. I'd be happy to talk to you about the calculations for the gas and oil sector, but as far as quantum computing is concerned, often people forget about Moore's law. The efficiency of a computer will continue, and it will continue to evolve with quantum computing. Yes, that will be beneficial to the blockchain in terms of efficiency and security. In reality, we already see algorithms to protect quantum computing, and if the quantum computer hacks the blockchain or other banking, it will be resolved quite quickly because everything is going to be done so quickly. It will have a positive impact on blockchain. So yes, there is an association between the two, but they're not in competition with each other. No, zero competition between them. You talked about the ledger earlier. We're talking about really a database, but quantum computing is not a database. It's complementary. Yes, that's right. We know that Canada is quite advanced in quantum computing, and so we're proposing in our study to we invest further in that. Do you think it would be important that we invest in the knowledge regarding blockchains in Canada? A very brief response, please. Yes. That was to be predicted. Thank you, Mr. Généreux, Mr. Saint-Jean. Mr. Gaillier, you have 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for making time for the committee. So my questions are generally open to all the witnesses. Are there risks of harm associated with blockchain technology? Proponents obviously make big claims regarding security and privacy, but we know that blockchains are only as secure as their weakest link. For example, if someone wanted to access data shared within an exclusive blockchain, they only need access to one node, and that means that the threat to the entire blockchain is the weakest link. So does anyone want to comment on that?
Say that what the government really needs to look into is also APIs. So it's the technology between the blockchain and how it interacts with the real world. So what I think you have to look at is, can the data be encrypted that's put on the blockchain? Because you don't have to put, what the blockchain stores could just be a transaction and the hash. And what you could actually have security if you hashed both sides. So for example, you can take a piece of data, hash it, throw it onto the blockchain, and have the other hash on the other side. And so you need two sides of it to unencrypt the information. So you can actually store any kind of data on the blockchain. And that's where I think the government really needs to do research, is like, how can we look at the layer that's between the blockchain and the real world? And it's like two systems. It's like a highway, and you have different cars running on the highway. They're going to be running at a different speed. And I think the industries have to collaborate together because, a lot of the thing is, like what we were mentioning previously, is like, I'm just going to add, financial instruments cannot be invested in if there's not financial regulation. But how do the regulators look at the blockchain? How can they make it secure for themselves? And then, so there's this middle layer that I think that could be really explored.
And all data on nodes are encrypted. Like, we don't have access to raw data. I participate in multiple blockchains through mining and through node creation. I do not have visibility into the data. I have visibility into the transactions, but not the data stored in those transactions. Those are encrypted with SHA-256, which is the strongest encryption right now. So the statement, I wanted to be clear, is just because you have access to node does not mean you have access to the raw data.
Okay, thank you. So the other problem that blockchain technology presents is the sluggish transaction speed. Because of the decentralized nature of the blockchain, each transaction has to be verified by the nodes before it's accepted by the block. So, it's hard to scale. It's a little bit sluggish. Any comments on that?
Another thing to add to this is, like, there's different kinds of blockchains. There's proof of work, proof of stake, proof of history, and there's other types. Proof of work is the oldest. It's the slow. And that's the most energy and efficient. Proof of stake is quick, energy efficient, and proof of history is even faster. It's like having an atomic clock on the blockchain. So you have Visa does 65,000 transactions per second. Solana blockchain, 65,000 transactions per second.
So, and just to add to that, going back to what I've said earlier, and I will hammer these 3 points over and over again, Blockchain is the database, the network is decentralized, which not all need to be, and cryptocurrency is the asset to help fuel or power the decentralized part of that network. So you can have a blockchain database that is not decentralized, that is extremely efficient and fast because it doesn't have to validate and cross-validate and collaborate with all the other decentralized servers. So decentralization is the network architecture, blockchain is the database, and then the cryptocurrency is the asset on that. So, but my colleague here was mentioning, there are multiple new technological efficiencies that are demonstrating the ability to go and create a decentralized network while increasing speed. So we're, like anything, technology evolves, and if we look back at 10 years ago, autonomous vehicles, AI, et cetera, we can't say that blockchain is slow, and say slow forever. Humans and technology evolve.
Great, thank you. And I think that plays into my third question very well, that blockchain technology consumes more energy than any centralized system would, because of the redundancy and because of the other points that I've brought up. What are your thoughts on the energy consumption?
On what I mentioned previously, which is the type of blockchain that you're using. So if you're using a proof of work blockchain, your Bitcoin uses the same amount of energy as Switzerland. But if you're using a proof of stake blockchain, no, you are not using that level of energy. If you're using a proof of history blockchain, you are not using that level. So not all blockchains are created equal. Depends on the working mechanism behind the blockchain and how you're proving the transactions are true. So in proof of stake blockchains, you have to bond the money in order for you to be a validator. And I can send more information to the committee after regarding this. But essentially, that means that there's different ways that they have different security issues. There's different ways they can be attacked. Proof of work, you would have to buy half the miners to take over the network. Proof of stake is different. You would have to own over half the value of the currency to control the network. So both disincentivize cheating, both work. It's just the energy efficiency behind them is different. Proof of stake, proof of history consume much compared to, I don't know what the statistics are compared to the banking sector, but it's not what it was previously, like my colleague said 10 years ago. The technology has advanced.
I'd be happy to have a 2-hour discussion just on all these different questions, so I won't try to answer them all in a few minutes, but I think we're looking at technological efficiencies resolve problems over time. So all these problems we are seeing them getting resolved. They are things that existed multiple years ago that are getting faster and better. Understanding consensus mechanisms matter based on what you're trying to secure on the blockchain. Proof of work matters if you're trying to secure billions of dollars of monetary value. A proof of history is much faster if you're trying to create a competitor to Visa, for example. So again, understanding these, they're not all built the same, and they're not all trying to solve the same problem. But I always go back to the root answer is we are seeing an asymptotic evolution in the technology that's making all of these better, faster, and more efficient. So all these problems are going to get resolved in the next 5 years, if not sooner.
Thank you very much, MP.
Great, thank you.
Gahir. If I may, Mr. Lemire, I would just have one question. You mentioned certain, Madame Osaka, you mentioned certain statistics in terms of the transactions per second that proof of history allows to do. Can you repeat that?
5,000 transactions per second.
And by way of comparison, how many transactions does, for instance, Visa or MasterCard does?
It's basically the same.
It's basically the same. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire.
Simplement mentionner que
I'd simply like to say that in French we couldn't get the number of transactions. Could you please repeat it? How many per second? How many transactions?
Merci. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, would you like to intervene? Because it's your study. You're very generous. If there's a little bit of time at the end, I will try and ask my questions then. Because you might have a block of independent questions as a chair. I could support that. I would like to continue, Mr. Saint-Jean. Perhaps the people from Olson could chime in as well. The energy consumption with cryptocurrencies and with the blockchain. Apparently, Hydro-Québec talks about all of these these crypto farms, 1.3 tetra water, and it's doubled and every year. So we're talking about energy used by 100,000 households, or all of the energy sold by Hydro-Quebec in a number of years ago. Can we expect this to continue in the future? And why does this technology use so much energy? Why not simply go to heating the basements in churches? I'll give you two examples. Technology changes, things become more and more efficient. The energy is sold by Hydro-Quebec. This was surplus energy that's negotiated with companies, whether it be a Bitcoin miner or some type. It's up to Hydro-Quebec to negotiate its rate. Some companies have been able to take advantage of the situation. There's CCU, a Quebec company that does Bitcoin mining, which is part of the community that has worked to create heat pumps, and so the heat is distributed to use district heating in the town. So they're working with the town to create ecosystems. So this is efficiency. This creates value for the company. It creates value for the Bitcoin, new businesses, and it also enables it is used to create infrastructure for a town that would never have. What town is this? Are you talking about? I heard this at dinner the other day. I can't remember it exactly, but I will contact the business. So we have to ensure that each village has a high-speed connection now. Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Jean. Thank you very much. Mr. Massé, for one final question, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll cede my time to you. You can have my time. I want you to get in there. It's your study, and I respect that.
Well, it's the committee's study, but I appreciate, of course, the committee's willingness to go along. I know there's a lot of interest, but I don't have that many questions. The only thing, though, for the benefits of members and of the public, you've mentioned, Monsieur Saint-Jean, smart contracts. I think it's not necessarily clear in most people's mind what that means and what are the use cases for smart contracts.
Absolutely happy to elaborate a little bit about that. We were talking about decentralized finance. So for the example that I was giving you, the example of this one peer-to-peer network that is enabling people to participate in the loan generation for down payment towards a mortgage. Right, so there needs to be certain terms there. So if we work with a bank or a centralized organization, there's a decision maker, which tends to be a human being who evaluates, your credit worthiness, my ability to lend, your ability to repay, et cetera. It makes a decision on that ability to happen. A smart contract is essentially a programmatical way of entering all this information into a contract that is basically observed and triggered based on data that gets provided. So if we were to go online and generate a contract together saying, I'll loan you X amount for X percentage, and you will give me X amount in collateral, and if you pay back by a certain date, you get your collateral back. This is all triggered by computer code, which is a smart contract that enables a lot of innovation of peer-to-peer finance, which is called decentralized finance. That's one of multiple examples. For example, if we were to do tokenized real estate and there were to be a yield generated from the rent, how do we distribute that automatically based on rules of ownership, smart contracts? So it's ways of using software and information to trigger specific actions.
Thank you. From my perspective, that's part of the appeal definitely to millennials who face a harder time gaining access to property. So I see the attraction. And in fact, the stats, I think, are clear that amongst millennials, the adoption is growing. The last question I've had, going back to the topic of Monsieur Le Maire of energy, par exemple, au Québec, on produit l'hydroélectricité.
In Quebec, we produce hydroelectricity. It's stored, so we always produce for the maximum demand. Do you know of any examples where the surplus is used for mining Bitcoin? Flare gas. This is energy where the energy is burned off and it's not resold. What is energy? In a battery, that is one thing. In currency, it's something else. Why can we take the unused energy or wasted energy to create a value and reuse this value to potentially repurchase energy or something else? Energy has a value, generally speaking, and it enables you to buy something else. So we could use Bitcoin or other types of blockchain technology to reuse energy that otherwise would be wasted, to create a value and reuse this value in the economy. And that there's a lot of potential here. It will help the economy and the government. We see some governments are even doing their own mining to get energy for their own citizens. So the energy otherwise would have simply been lost. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Massé, for graciously giving me your time. Mr. Genereux, speaking of generous, yes, you're talking about me a lot today. I would like to suggest to the committee, to the extent possible, that we make a trip, an exploratory trip to a farm, a Bitcoin farm, or a blockchain farm, I should be saying. I don't know if there are any here in Ottawa or in Montreal, Quebec City, Toronto, so that the committee can find out more about how these farms operate. I'm just suggesting this to the committee. I have noted that. We're going to be going to deal with committee business in camera, so perhaps we could discuss that matter there, and we could do it in camera and let our witnesses, who have already been very generous with their patience.
Thanks for starting the study with the industry committee. I wish you a good evening, and again, many thanks. This meeting is suspended.